you think needs to be done to implement the strategy for the state banks which exists now? Well, let's assume there is the strategy that we need to privatize. We have the understanding what the preconditions are. So what needs to be done? And whether I understand it correctly that the supervisory boards, which have to be formed according to the new law, their profile will be to prepare the state-owned banks for privatization process. I do hope you are right, or maybe I am even sure it is right. Because, by the way, I'd like to have a short remark to support Mikloš. My personal, I'm sure personally, and what we in fact discuss in the National Bank, that really privatization is a kind of medicine of bad corporate governance, because the private investor always takes care about all of the processes, maybe in a more efficient way. So if we speak about the state-owned banks precisely here, again, we have the understanding that the state, in fact, for today, has to, well, we have such a target function. We have to take not more than 30% at the financial market. Today, this indicator is approximately 60% after the nationalization of Private Bank. And it's understandable what we need to do with each of the banks. And about two of them, Private Bank and Ukrzaliznytsia, there are more or less precise roadmaps with predefined steps. So we have two more state-owned banks about which we need to conduct this work by the supervisory boards which will be elected. Can we now rather quickly privatize the state-owned banks? The answer is no. And we can see it on the example of Ukrzaliznytsia, which is the closest to the moment when it can change the owner, or at least to get an additional owner besides the state, because any private investor has certain requirements for the structure of the assets. It's not a secret if I tell you that the state monopolies for today are credited in the state banks. And for instance, as for Ukrzaliznytsia, which elected the strategy of EcoBank, we can see certain wishes from the potential investor that its balance should be decreased or for the share of the state monopolies. So then there is a question: where should the state monopolies go if we want to privatize all of the state-owned banks? Where they will be served, where they will take loans during the period when we do understand that the external markets are still not open for us. And our state monopolies, well, let's not hide that, they have some problem with the debts they have already. For instance, Ukrzaliznytsia, Ukrainian railway, which pays to one bank and does not pay to the other, goes to the court to have certain credit contracts, court file, using the gaps in the legislation. So the issue is of the potential privatization of the state-owned banks is directly connected with the issue of the corporate governance of the state monopolies, because the independent supervisory boards of those state monopolies have to define and to approve the strategic plans of their development, to understand the funding and debts which exist already, to define what's the target function, and to begin to move in the proper direction. Then those state monopolies will be able to go to the internal and external markets, having the strategy of development, long-term plans, financial plans including, business plans, to involve different loans and to have the competition conditions and not only to use the only opportunity, the state-owned banks. And still, it impacts again onto the implementation of the corporate governance and strategy in the state-owned banks. Because how can we say that the National Bank has developed several requirements, there are new regulations, we do understand how we implement, and the Ministry of Finance totally is at the same page with us, because we know what we'll do, but we cannot move on because what the corporate governance of the state-owned property is. First of all, after the question why, what's the aim, it has to provide the equal competitive conditions for everyone. The state as a regulator is one thing, the state as an owner is a different thing. We're speaking about the state-owned banks which have historical legacy, they have the special separate conditions from the National Bank, because the state-owned enterprises are concentrated there, which violates certain regulations. So today, if we speak about equal opportunities, we need to use the sanctions. If we speak about the state point of view, understanding the consequences of the crisis, we're saying, okay, let us have those special conditions still, but please, independent supervisory boards of the big state monopolies, do something. For the 4 years, we're coming to the Ministry of Economic Development, we're communicating with them and suggesting, let's begin with Naftogaz and Ukrzaliznytsia. Let's together sit down at the table and look at the perspective. What can be done for us not to prolong those waivers every year, but, dear people, for us to understand, let it be a 7-year, 10-year term, but let us approve that and gradually will decrease the amount of active-passive operations in the state banks. What's the decree of the Cabinet of Ministers if we are saying that all of the state-owned enterprises are in the state-owned banks? Is it the competition? The answer is no. All of those are open questions. So when we're speaking about the state-owned banks, we need to understand the banking function is in fact a service. If the banking function it's a derivative of economy, you see? So if the main asset works in an improper way, the derivative cannot be proper. If in the main asset of the corporate guidance does not exist, the derivative will not exist. It is just the result. It would totally mirror all the drawbacks. So, of course, we need to define the priorities, and I totally support you that we need to define the objects we need to privatize, to do it as soon as possible, to prepare them. But simultaneously, we still need, maybe according to those enterprises, which the state, because of those reasons, has an intention to still to be state-owned, because the whole world has state-owned enterprises. When the state implements its social function through those enterprises, providing the society, there we need to work, and even we needed to work yesterday on the corporate guidance. Ms. Kateryna will work